The old saloon sat just outside the wire of Redstone Ridge Forward Operating Base, its weathered boards groaning under boots coated in sand and long days. Faded neon signs flickered against dusty windows, throwing shaky light over the packed room where Marines and soldiers tried to shake off another burning hot shift. Laughter rose and fell, mugs clattered, and a tired jukebox hummed under the noise. In the far corner, far from the rowdy crowd, sat Dana Rourke. Plain jeans, a gray shirt, 32 years old, steady posture, breathing calm like someone who never asked for attention. She sipped only water, watching exits more than people. A group of Marines eventually noticed how still she was. Sergeant Cole Wexler, broad, loud, always trying to impress, nudged his buddies and swaggered her way. He joked about her sitting alone, called her dead weight, then tried to buy her a drink she clearly didn't want. When she quietly refused, he shoved her shoulder hard enough that the entire saloon went silent. Dana didn't flinch. She simply glanced at the exact spot he touched, then lifted her eyes to him. Cold, unreadable. For a moment, something sharp crossed her face. Gone almost instantly. She placed money on the counter for the untouched water and walked out without a word. Whispers followed her into the night. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Major Tom's Tales so you never miss these real stories of courage, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Dana Rourke went through most days unnoticed, and that suited her perfectly. 32, wearing the same gray shirt and worn jeans nearly every day. She moved around Redstone Ridge FOB with the quiet presence of someone who blended into the backdrop. Officially, she was nothing more than a civilian logistics clerk, a GS-10 type stuck with endless inventory work. Her job sat so low on the ladder that even the paperwork seemed bored describing it. Her appearance matched the assignment. Soft steps, a calm voice, no jewelry, nothing flashy. Nothing about her hinted at combat or intensity. She carried small stacks of forms tucked under her arm, eyes down, expression neutral. If someone bumped her in a hallway, they forgot her instantly. In briefing rooms, officers talked right over her. In the dining hall, tables filled around her with no one choosing the seat beside her. People didn't dislike her. They simply never noticed her. But tiny hints suggested something deeper beneath the surface. Every time she entered a room, her eyes swept the exits before she sat. In crowded hallways, she kept her right hand free, never letting it get trapped between bodies or gear. She recognized who approached by the rhythm of boots before they got close. And when a forklift driver dropped a heavy crate with a crash loud enough to rattle rafters, everyone around her jumped, except Dana. She reacted first with a subtle flinch and balanced shift, the kind learned by people who've lived through explosions. If anyone had paid attention, they might have wondered. But no one did. Especially not Sergeant Cole Wexler. He was the Marine who shoved her the night before. 30 years old, competitive, tall, muscles tight beneath rolled sleeves. His reputation was a strange blend. Respected for strength, tolerated for ego, and quietly avoided when his mood shifted. He walked like he owned every foot of ground. His two closest buddies, Corporal Jace Rennick and Private Rowan Keene, followed him the way younger Marines often follow the loudest voice in the room. They had laughed at Dana in the saloon. To them, it was nothing more than another moment in a place full of rough humor and tougher people. And by the next morning, that moment had already become official business. Respected for his strength, tolerated for his ego, and avoided whenever his temper shifted, Cole Wexler carried himself like he owned every inch of ground he walked on. His two closest buddies, Corporal Jace Rennick and Private Rowan Keene, stayed glued to him with the kind of loyalty younger Marines give the loudest guy in the room. They had laughed at Dana's humiliation without a second thought. To them, it was just one more forgettable moment in a place overflowing with rough jokes and tougher people. By the following morning, that moment had turned into official business. Wexler and Dana were ordered to report to the office of Lieutenant Colonel Brett Armitage. Armitage, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a face carved by sun and years of command, stood behind his desk in a crisp uniform and a voice made of gravel. He had no patience for disruptions, especially ones involving civilians he barely remembered approving. Wexler stepped forward first, confident and polished, offering a half-truth explanation of the night. He claimed he was being friendly, that Dana misunderstood his words, that he leaned in by accident and she reacted too strongly. The way he framed it made it sound like he was being punished for offering someone a friendly drink. Dana never interrupted. She stood still with paperwork tucked under her arm, her expression unreadable. When Armitage finally looked her way, his tone held irritation rather than actual curiosity. He didn't ask what happened. Instead, he lectured her about understanding Marine culture, about not escalating minor run-ins, and about knowing her place on a high-stress base. His disappointment landed on her shoulders, not on the Marine who caused the issue. She quietly answered, "Yes, sir." Understood. Armitage gave Wexler 72 hours of base restriction, nothing more than a tap on the wrist, then dismissed them both. Dana walked out without any visible emotion, though one thought stuck in Armitage's mind. Civilian clerks always brought him extra paperwork trouble, and he hoped he wouldn't need to deal with her again. She returned to her cramped logistics desk, where a battered computer sat buried under piles of shipping manifests and fuel reports. To anyone watching, it looked like she slipped straight back into supply tracking, but her gaze wasn't scanning numbers the way a bored clerk would. Her eyes flicked across inconsistencies, mismatched freight times, duplicate equipment logs, late-night generator access requests. She wasn't tracking supplies, she was tracking patterns. Patterns no one else noticed. Patterns tied to something bigger than anyone suspected. Her real mission lived between the lines, quietly unfolding, while everyone else continued treating her like part of the wallpaper. And she preferred it that way. The next 3 days dragged across Redstone Ridge Fob, the air tasting like metal and dust. For most people, routine settled back in. For Dana Rourke, the edges of that routine felt sharper. In the chow line, Marines cut in front of her without even glancing back. One lean lance corporal with a crooked grin looked over his shoulder and smirked. He elbowed his friend and said just loud enough to be heard, "Careful, man. That's the saloon girl. She might write you up for breathing too loud." The table behind them burst into laughter. Trays hitting tables, spoons clinking, shoulders shaking. Dana stood there holding her tray steady, her face calm, her eyes somewhere miles past them. She simply stepped back half a pace and let the line fill in as if nothing happened. When she finally reached the counter, the server gave her an almost apologetic look that he didn't fully commit to. She nodded once, took her food, and moved to a table tucked against the wall where, as usual, no one joined her. Conversations swirled around, stories about heat, patrols, broken equipment, while her corner remained silent. Outside, in the open walkways between buildings, the nickname lingered. Marines would greet Wexler and then tilt their heads toward Dana as she crossed the yard with a stack of folders. "There goes the saloon girl," someone muttered. "Man, I barely bumped her. She would have flown." Another joked, reenacting an exaggerated stumble. The laughter always started loud, but each time Dana didn't react, it died quicker. Jokes don't survive when they don't land. And the truth was, she wasn't staying silent to look strong. She simply had more important things to focus on. She kept moving, always with that same quiet, unwavering purpose. She moved quietly between motor pools and warehouse rows, carrying clipboards that looked like simple checklists for tires and fuel drums. No one stopped her. No one questioned where she was heading. A logistics clerk floated everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Along the way, scraps of conversation drifted to her ears. Near the communications shed, two soldiers crouched beside a crate of radios, sorting through spare batteries. "I'm telling you, the count is off again," one muttered, tapping the manifest. "We signed for 60, but I'm only seeing 52. "That's not dust. You're missing gear," the other replied with a shrug. "Supply probably miscounted, or someone checked them out twice and skipped the paperwork." Dana kept walking, not turning her head, but the number stuck immediately. 8 batteries gone. Another piece in a puzzle that still refused to form a whole picture. Later, behind one of the fuel farms, she overheard a sergeant tearing into a corporal. "How do fuel drums disappear?" he snapped. "They don't just sprout legs and walk." The corporal swore the logs were clean. The night shift checked everything. Nothing added up. Dana paused long enough to scan the drum labels, committing serial numbers to memory, then kept moving. To anyone else, she looked like she was checking whether the tags had peeled off. But to her, each missing item hinted at something much bigger moving in the shadows. On the second afternoon, she headed toward the motor pool with a stack of forms held tight under her arm. Engines growled, metal clanked, and the scent of oil hung thick in the heat. Marines worked around Humvees and armored trucks, shirts soaked with sweat. Sergeant Cole Vexler noticed her first. He leaned against a vehicle, wiping his hands with a rag while chatting with Corporal Jace Rennick and Private Rowan Keene. When he spotted Dana approaching, his grin twisted into something smug. He'd been waiting for this. "Well, look who survived the Wild West," he shouted over the noise. "Thought you might have snapped in half from that tiny tap at the saloon." Dana stopped a few steps away, keeping distance between herself and the group. She shifted her clipboard slightly, her expression calm. "I'm fine, Sergeant," she said. "Just here for vehicle log updates." Vexler pushed off the truck and closed the gap, stepping just inside her personal space. "You're fine," he repeated, amused. "That's what I like about you, Rourke. Tough skin, for someone glued to a desk." Rennick snickered. Keene shifted awkwardly, caught between loyalty and discomfort. Vexler kept digging. "Tell me, lose any sleep after that talk with the colonel? Or are you used to stirring trouble and walking off clean?" Dana met his eyes. No anger, no fear. Just that still, quiet steadiness that didn't fit the moment. "I didn't get anyone in trouble, Sergeant," she replied. "You put yourself there and the punishment was mild." The laughter around them stuttered out. Vexler's smile tightened. Silence crept into the motor pool, broken only by the distant hiss of a hydraulic jack. He leaned in a fraction more, narrowing his eyes. "Careful, clerk," he said low. "Talk like that, and people might forget you're the soft one here." Dana didn't budge. "I'm not confused about who's who," she said. Then she adjusted her clipboard and added, "Are we done, Sergeant? I have work." She walked past him, leaving him standing in the thick heat without an answer. For those watching, a question floated in the air. What would you have done in that moment? Keep quiet or stand up? That night, long after most of the base collapsed into exhausted sleep, Dana moved down a narrow service path behind a row of generators. Moonlight washed the concrete pale, and the hum of machinery pulsed under her feet. She stopped near a restricted generator trailer and noticed something off. Footprints. Faint impressions in the dusty surface. not the heavy tread of Marine-issue boots. These were narrower, smoother, like a lightweight shoe built for speed and silence. The spacing told a story. Someone who knew how to move without being seen. Dana crouched, studying the prints more closely. The trail led from the side gate toward the generator, then looped back in a careful arc. A patrol vehicle had passed afterward, but the footprints remained clear. The next day, in the maintenance bay, she heard a frustrated mechanic muttering inside an open cooling unit. "This is insane," he said. "Whoever messed with this last night knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some bored private tinkering, this was professional." His partner frowned. "You sure?" "Positive," the mechanic replied. "Bolts loosened in sequence, panels removed perfectly, wiring moved and put back like it was never touched." Dana slowed her steps just long enough to absorb every word, then continued on, face neutral, mind racing. "None of my guys did this." Dana slowed her pace just enough to take in every word, then kept moving, face steady while her mind sped ahead. Back at her cramped desk, she pulled out her notes and began to write. On the surface, the pages looked like ordinary inventory entries, equipment numbers, locations, timestamps, but hidden between those lines sat tiny coded marks she'd used for years. A triangle here, a single slash there, dots placed in specific patterns only she could interpret. Each symbol flagged something, an inconsistency, a suspicious pattern, a possible infiltration route. Her writing was quick but precise, fingers steady, eyes laser-focused. As the air conditioner rattled overhead, she began linking fuel discrepancies with generator access logs, missing radio batteries with late-night gate scans. Alone in that small room, the puzzle she had been assembling in silence finally began forming its shape. She was so deep in it, she didn't notice Cole Wexler entering the office until his shadow spilled across her desk. "Well, would you look at this?" he said, grabbing the clipboard before she could react. "Clerks and their love letters to paperwork." He yanked it out of her hands and stepped back, far enough that she couldn't reach it. Her muscles tightened instinctively, then eased when she forced herself to stay calm. Wexler flipped through the first page, expecting boring checklists. Instead, he found patterns he couldn't decode. "What is this?" he scoffed. "Fuel drum numbers, generator tags, battery counts? You courting a diesel tank or something?" Rennick snorted behind him. Keene didn't laugh this time. Wexler read aloud one of her coded lines, exaggerating each symbol. "Trailer 7, Gate 2, 0200 hours, /triangle. Wow, Rourke, you really need a hobby." He had no idea what any of it meant, and that was exactly the purpose. Dana stood but didn't argue or reach for the clipboard. She simply extended her hand. "I need that back, Sergeant," she said quietly. "Those are my notes." He glanced from the paper to her face, searching for embarrassment. There wasn't a trace of it. No flushed cheeks, no defensive stammering. Just that calm, unnerving steadiness that made his jokes feel small. The laughter behind him faded. After a beat, he snorted and shoved the clipboard back into her hands. "Knock yourself out," he muttered. "Just don't go getting people in trouble with your coloring book." He walked off, dragging the noise with him, and slowly the office settled back into the usual hum of typing and low phone chatter. Dana sat down again, holding the clipboard with surprising softness. She smoothed the top page, checked that nothing had smeared, and went right back to writing. Outside, the base moved on. Patrols rolled out. Convoys formed. Heat shimmered across metal and sand. Attention clung to the air, something people blamed on weather or tempo. But no one, not the irritated sergeant or the worn-down lieutenant colonel, connected that unease to the quiet clerk mapping out a threat in plain sight. As the week went on, the heat eased slightly, but Dana Rourke's movements grew sharper, more deliberate. She walked the hallways with the ease of someone who'd memorized every inch of them. To most Marines, she looked like a clerk doing her best to stay invisible. But to anyone paying attention, small details whispered a different truth. Late one afternoon, a young private named Lander Briggs was heading down a nearly empty hallway as Donna approached from the other end. Just before reaching the logistics office door, she paused for a split second and rolled her shoulder. Not a stretch, not a shrug, something else entirely. Not a stretch, not a shrug, but the precise, intentional shift of someone preparing to step into uncertain space. Lander Briggs had seen that kind of movement in training videos, the sort instructors called pre-contact readiness. He blinked, unsure if he had actually witnessed it, then convinced himself she was probably just stiff from carrying paperwork. But then he noticed something else. As Dana reached for the door, her gray sleeve slid just enough to reveal a faint mark on her wrist. A faded tattoo. Nothing decorative, nothing pretty. One of those simple coded symbols used years ago by certain units. Briggs caught the glimpse, froze mid-step, and frowned. By the time he looked again, her sleeve had dropped back into place and she was already inside the office. The moment passed, leaving him unsure whether his mind had played a trick on him. The next morning, a staff sergeant walking from the supply shed happened to spot Dana stepping off the walkway just seconds before a convoy thundered down the east path. Engines growled, dust rolled behind armored trucks. Most civilians misjudged the distance or froze in panic. Dana moved before the first Humvee even turned the corner, shifting her weight like someone who had known convoy rhythms for years. The staff sergeant lifted his eyebrows. No logistics clerk should move like that. Not naturally, not without thinking. Dana didn't look back. She simply kept going. Later that day, she walked the perimeter fence with her clipboard held tight to her chest. The wire hummed in the dry wind as she studied camera angles, measured the shadow gaps between poles, marked the blind spots where patrol eyes never lingered. A military police corporal called out, "Ma'am, everything good?" Dana raised the clipboard. "Logistic survey," she replied. "Inventory routing." He nodded and moved on. No one questioned a clerk inspecting infrastructure, especially during a week loaded with audits. Still, her eyes traced the fence with the precision of someone mapping approaches, not counting them. Across the yard, Sergeant Cole Vexler watched her from behind a Humvee, arms crossed, jaw tightening with irritation. Her calm, steady movements gnawed at him. Clerks were supposed to flinch, ask questions, complain. They weren't supposed to walk around like they owned every blind spot on the base. He didn't trust it. Or maybe he just hated not understanding it. Dana didn't notice him. Or maybe she did, and simply didn't care. That evening, after the sun dipped behind the ridge and the lights buzzed awake, Dana slipped behind a supply container and pulled out a small device. Black, unmarked, no antenna, no insignia. It looked like a burner phone, but definitely wasn't one. The screen flashed a single message. 3 days. No sender, no timestamp, nothing else. She read it once, her face flat, then tapped a coded sequence and wiped the device clean. The message vanished without a trace. She slid it back into her pocket, her posture tightening just slightly before she stepped into the dim base lights. Around her, conversations drifted like distant thunder. 2 comtechs whispered about increased enemy probing at outer checkpoints. A mechanic murmured about a rumor that some high-ranking VIPs were expected over the weekend. At the dining facility entrance, a corporal muttered, "Intel thinks something's coming." They're seeing patterns they don't like. Most troops shrugged it off as deployment gossip, the constant churn of rumors that filled the space between boredom and fear. But one conversation snapped Dana's attention into focus. Near the communications bunker, two officers stood where they thought no one could hear them. One asked quietly, "Is the asset already here?" The other hesitated. "If they are, they're deep cover. No one's talking." Dana didn't slow her pace. She didn't turn. She didn't even shift her breathing. She simply kept walking, her expression as plain as it had been since day one. Her silence wasn't shyness, it was strategy. And Redstone Ridge Fob had no idea how close its secrets were to being uncovered, or how much closer real danger stood. By midday, the base felt like a furnace. The sun hammered down on metal until everything scorched to the touch, forcing even seasoned Marines to duck into whatever shade they could find. Dana Rourke walked a narrow path beside the supply warehouse, clipboard in hand, eyes drifting across patterns only she understood. Sweat traced her jawline, but she didn't lift a hand to wipe it. She'd trained herself out of reacting to discomfort long ago. Inside the motor pool, Sergeant Cole Vexler barked orders while engines roared and Marines rolled tool carts across shimmering pavement. Private Rowan Keene tossed a rag at Corporal Jace Rennick, laughing at something half funny. And for a brief moment the scene looked perfectly normal. The usual tempo, the usual heat, the usual grind, until everything snapped at once. The lights didn't flicker, they died instantly. Engines coughed out, fans stopped mid-spin, and the steady rumble of generators collapsed into a heavy, swallowing silence. Jace Rennick looked up. "What the—" He didn't finish. The backup generators choked and failed one after another, each dying as if someone had sliced their wiring clean. Dana stopped in her tracks. This wasn't malfunction. This was coordinated. The next second confirmed it. Gunfire erupted from the western perimeter. Tight, controlled bursts fired by people who knew exactly what they were doing. A distant alarm tried to start, sputtered once, and died. Marines snapped into motion, sprinting to lockers, grabbing rifles, shouting orders. More shots cracked from the east, then from inside the base itself. Dana didn't gasp or freeze. She just drew one slow breath. It had begun. Cole Vexler reacted fast, credit where it was due. He yanked Rennick and Keene by their sleeves. "Move, gear up, gate." They sprinted toward the armory cage, boots hammering the concrete. Somewhere behind them, a massive explosion tore through the communications hub, a fireball rising above the rooftops as debris rained down across vehicles and scattered Marines. "Comms hub is down," someone screamed. "Repeaters are gone." Vexler slammed a magazine into his rifle with shaking hands. Not fear, just raw adrenaline. "Keene, on me. Rennick, left flank, move." They pushed toward the front gate now, swallowed in smoke and dust. Screams cut through the air. Suppressed weapons hissed from impossible angles. Enemy rounds punched into walls and sandbags with brutal precision. Dana didn't run with the others. Instead, she moved toward the silence, the blind corners, the kill zones she knew the infiltrators would use. Her steps lowered, controlled, her breathing steadying into something colder than calm. Near the library, a body lay slumped behind an overturned cart. An Air Force security defender, barely more than a kid, his rifle still strapped to him, unfired. Dana knelt, gently closed his fading eyes, then slid the M4 from under him with practiced ease. She checked the mag, racked the charging handle, and exhaled. The shift happened instantly. The quiet clerk disappeared. In her place moved a shadow, silent, fluid, and terrifyingly sure. Cutting behind the library, she slipped through a service corridor just as two infiltrators jogged past, disguised in maintenance gear, rifles hidden under their coats. Their voices were too calm for men invading a base. Dana pressed against the wall, waited for them to turn the corner, then followed like a ghost. When the one in the rear slowed to check his watch, she closed the distance. One sharp strike to the back of his skull. Clean, efficient. Before the second man could turn fully, she raised the M4 and fired a single round. He dropped instantly. No hesitation, no wasted motion. She dragged both bodies behind a dumpster and wiped her palm on her jeans, erasing prints, her face blank. No fear, no thrill, just purpose. Meanwhile, Wexler and his squad reached the gate junction. Too late. A wave of enemy fighters had already poured through a breach in the wall, slipping past now-dead cameras. Marines engaged, but these attackers weren't amateurs. They forced the squad backward, herding them into an L-shaped kill zone along the concrete barrier. Contact left. Bullets shredded the air, snapping past their heads. Rowan Keene screamed as a round tore into his shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Rennick grabbed his vest and dragged him behind sandbags. "Stay with me, Keene. Stay awake." Wexler fired at a rooftop flash and yelled, "Machine gun, down!" A heavy-caliber weapon roared from above, ripping long bursts across their position. Concrete chipped, dust blasted upward, and the Marines flattened themselves against the barrier, pinned by the angle. Wexler tried shifting position, but rounds stitched the ground inches from his face. They were trapped. Another minute and they'd all be dead. "We're exposed! Somebody take that gun out!" But no one could. Every attempt to peek out was met with another vicious burst. And then, everything changed. Dana Rourke climbed onto the top of a warehouse ladder on the far side of the yard, her silhouette cutting sharp against the burning sky. From her vantage point, she saw the rooftop crew, 3 enemy fighters operating the machine gun, focused entirely on Wexler's squad. No hesitation. She pulled a flashbang from the airman's vest she'd taken earlier, pin out. Eyes closed a heartbeat before detonation. The blast cracked through the air. The gunner staggered, blinded and stunned. Dana shifted into a low firing stance, feet solid, rifle steady. 3 shots, 1, 2, 3. Each hit perfectly. Silence swallowed the machine gun's roar. Below, Wexler lifted his head slowly, unable to believe the sudden quiet. Dust drifted through the air like ash. Then he saw a figure on the roofline, small, calm, rifle lowered. The saloon girl, the clerk, Dana Rourke. And for the first time in his life, Cole Wexler felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Not fear, respect. He couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. How she moved, how she fired, how she appeared exactly where she was needed. The only truth Cole Wexler understood was this. The woman he shoved days earlier had just saved him and his squad without a second thought. He blinked, trying to process the entire world flipping upside down. Dana didn't stay long enough for thanks. She pivoted off the roofline, disappeared into the smoke, and was gone as if she had never been there. But Wexler knew better. No clerk moved like that, and no clerk appeared with that kind of timing. The Tactical Operations Center was supposed to be the safest building on Redstone Ridge FOB. Reinforced doors, controlled access, armed guards. None of that mattered when the power collapsed and the infiltrators swept through the hallways like they'd rehearsed the floor plan for months. Smoke curled through shattered windows. Gunfire ricocheted off filing cabinets. The nerve center of the entire base had been swallowed whole, and Cole Brett Armitage found himself shoved to his knees beside the command table, a pistol jammed against his skull. The insurgent leader barked demands in accented English. access codes, intelligence packets, and a hard drive he called the Kestrel data. Armitage tried to keep his eyes up, refusing to give anything away, but fear clawed through his chest. His staff lay wounded or worse. His Marines were scattered, and the man pressing the gun against his head knew exactly how vulnerable they were. "You open the system," the leader hissed, "or your men bleed for your arrogance." Armitage clenched his jaw. "I won't." A metallic thump echoed overhead. The insurgent leader froze, glaring up toward the vent. He waved two of his fighters toward the sound. They never made it. The vent panel dropped in total silence, and a figure slid through with the weightless control of someone who had done it 100 times before. Dana Rourke hit the ground in a tight crouch, rifle angled, eyes already locked on her first target. 3 shots, clean, surgical, and 3 bodies hit the floor before anyone could react. The room froze. Even Armitage couldn't blink. His mind refused to believe the quiet woman from logistics was the same person now, moving like a specter across the chaos. The insurgent leader staggered back, stunned but still dangerous. He raised his pistol toward her, shouting in panic. She was faster. Dana stepped in, twisted his wrist with a sharp torque that snapped bone, kicked his knee sideways and slammed him to the floor with a blow that knocked the air from his lungs. He reached for a knife. She pinned his arm with her boot and struck a nerve cluster in his neck that shut his body down instantly. Alive, but helpless. The entire takedown lasted maybe 5 seconds. Armitage just stared, dust drifting through the dim light, trying to reconcile the woman from his paperwork lectures with the ghost who had just saved his life. Dana swept the room once more to confirm no remaining threats, then slung the rifle over her shoulder. "Sir," she said, voice calm, breath steady, "secure your perimeter." Armitage managed only a nod. Outside, the thump of rotor blades grew louder, fast, heavy, purposeful. 2 unmarked MH-6 Little Birds cut through the smoke as they touched down near the talk. Operators in black gear moved with disciplined precision, weapons low but ready. Commander Hale Draven stepped forward, the only one without a mask. Gray, threading his beard, eyes sharp from decades of missions no one would ever acknowledge, he scanned the scene once, then walked straight past Armitage, straight past the confused Marine, straight to Dana. He stopped in front of her, his voice low but unmistakably clear. "Good work, Shadow," he said. "Is the package secure?" The Marines outside the talk froze in place, rifles lowered, eyes fixed on the impossible sight before them. Smoke drifted across their boots. Dust hung thick in the air. And in the center of it all stood Dana Rourke, the quiet clerk they'd mocked, ignored, and brushed aside. Calm, steady, the unconscious insurgent leader at her feet. Cole Vexler was the first to move. He limped forward, one hand pressing a cut above his eyebrow, his uniform torn and caked in dirt. The swagger he carried everywhere, in the motor pool, the chow line, the saloon, had drained from him completely. Each step felt heavier than the last. His squad followed behind him, Jace Rennick supporting a pale, trembling Rowan Keene, who clutched his bandaged shoulder. Vexler stopped in front of Dana. For a long moment he didn't speak. He just looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time since the night he shoved her in the saloon, the memory hit him like a blow. The laughter, the arrogance, the shove he thought made him powerful. Now, standing in front of the woman who had saved his life twice in an hour, the shame hit harder than any bullet. He straightened as best he could, jaw tight. Then he raised his hand, slowly, into a salute. Not the quick, automatic salute he tossed at officers without thinking. This one was slow. Deliberate, heavy, something carved out of humility and respect. a silent admission of just how wrong he'd been. Behind him, Jace Rennick swallowed hard and raised his own hand. Rowan Keene, pale and shaking, lifted his salute with the one arm he could still use. One by one, every Marine still standing in the area, bruised, dust-covered, breathless, brought their hands to their brows. The battle noise faded, replaced by a quiet that stretched across the smoking base like a held breath. Dana didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. She gave a single small nod, one that held both forgiveness and finality in the same motion. Cole Vexler's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. It was enough. Colbrett Armitage stepped forward next, his face streaked with sweat, ash, and the kind of disbelief that rewrites a man from the inside out. Moments ago, he watched her dismantle an elite strike element inside his own Tiak with a level of precision he couldn't fully process. The weight of that failure sat heavy in his chest. He had misjudged her so completely, so confidently, that it felt like a physical blow. When he reached her, he removed his helmet and held it under his arm. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice catching, "I owe you more than I can put into words. I didn't listen. I didn't see. And you saved every one of us." Dana met his eyes. No pride, no anger, just calm acknowledgement. She nodded once, and it was enough to make Armitage lower his head in a gesture of a man finally recognizing a truth he had refused to see. A few steps away, Commander Hale Draven approached. His Tier 1 team was already locking down the perimeter, moving Marines to safer ground, collecting intel, sweeping for stragglers. The MH6 rotors behind them chopped the air with a slow, powerful rhythm. Draven stopped beside Dana and spoke in a voice meant for her alone. "The Kestrel cache intel," he said, "is already proving out. What you pulled from that server room just stopped a large-scale regional strike. Dozens of convoys, hundreds of lives, maybe more." Dana didn't smile. Her gaze dropped slightly, absorbing the information with quiet, steady resolve. Draven continued, "We'll take the prisoner, debrief him in the air. You did what no one else here even knew needed doing." She looked back across the base, the wounded being tended by medics, Marines catching their breath, the scorched ground, the thin trails of smoke curling into the morning air. Ordinary service members caught in an extraordinary storm they would never fully understand. Drolvin turned to Armitage, who stiffened under that calm, uncompromising stare. "You never saw her," Drolvin said simply, voice flat. Armitage nodded instantly. "Understood." Drolvin scanned the scene once more, then placed a steady hand on Dana's shoulder. "Time to exfil." His Tier 1 operators formed a protective corridor around her, guiding the path toward the waiting helicopters. Marines stepped aside without being told. Their eyes followed her with a reverence deeper than rank, deeper than reputation. Even those who didn't know what she truly was understood what she had done. As Dana walked toward the MH6, the weight of everything she had carried alone settled over the battered base. The woman dismissed as a problem. The clerk overlooked and ignored. The stranger mocked in the saloon. The one no one believed mattered. She had been the one holding the line in the shadows the entire time. And now, as the rotors climbed in pitch and wind swept across the cracked concrete, every Marine who had underestimated her stood silent and humbled, watching the quiet warrior they never saw coming prepare to vanish back into a world they would never enter. The climax didn't roar. It didn't need to. Silence carried more weight than applause ever could. Dawn crept over Redstone Ridge afob, washing the damaged base in pale gold light. Smoke drifted from the ruined communications hub, and medics moved gently among wounded Marines, finally settling after the chaos. Dana Rourke walked through the aftermath with steady, even steps. The M4 taken from the fallen airman Tyler Gage rested in her hands. She had cleaned it completely, broken it down, reassembled every pin, wiped every trace of dust and blood, honoring the weapon the way soldiers honor the brothers they've lost. When she reached a nervous young security forces NCO near a triage tent, she held the rifle out toward him. "This belonged to one of yours," she said quietly. The young NCO glanced at the rifle, then at her. He didn't ask how she had used it. He didn't ask where she had been. He simply nodded and accepted the weapon with both hands, holding it like something sacred. Dana dipped her head lightly and kept moving. As she crossed the base, Marines stepped aside without needing instruction. Some straightened instinctively. Others paused mid-task, following her with humbled, silent respect. No one saluted. They weren't sure if they should. Instead, each offered a small nod, an acknowledgement from warrior to warrior, the woman they ignored, the woman they mocked, the woman they thought didn't belong. She passed among them like a shadow moving through early light, free of ego, untouched by triumph. At the far edge of Redstone Ridge, Fob sat an old maintenance hangar, dim and lonely beneath a single flickering yellow bulb. Dana stepped inside and sat on an overturned crate, folding her hands loosely in her lap. The hum of distant engines and the quiet murmurs of waking Marines softened into background noise. She waited. Minutes passed, measured, unhurried, before Commander Hale Draven stepped through the door. His posture held its usual discipline, but his eyes carried something warmer. A rare flicker of gratitude meant for someone who didn't need it, spoken aloud. "Exfil's ready," he said. Dana rose. No questions, no hesitation. She slung a small pack over her shoulder, adjusted the strap of the now empty rifle bag she carried, and met Draven's gaze with one steady nod. Together, they stepped out of the hangar just as the first full sweep of sunlight spilled across the desert. Wind curled around their boots, lifting sand into gentle spirals. The helicopter rotors beat warm air across the ground, bending the light into rippling bands. And then Dana Rourke, Shadow, walked into the rising sun and disappeared into the world where real names fade. Missions go unrecorded, and the only applause comes from the silence left behind. As the dust settled, the narrator's voice carried the truth that would linger at Redstone Ridge long after she was gone. Courage often hides behind the plainest faces. Respect is earned not by rank, but by character. And the quietest warriors are often the ones who carry the heaviest battles, so the rest of us can breathe freely. Some stories never make the news. Some heroes never pin medals to their uniforms. And some acts of courage unfold in the shadows, carried out by people no one notices until the moment the world needs them most. Dana Rourke was one of those warriors, someone who moved quietly, protected without praise, and stood between danger and the innocent long before anyone realized they needed saving. Her strength didn't come from loud words or visible authority, but from the belief that doing the right thing doesn't require a witness. Most Marines at Redstone Ridge would never know her full story. They would remember only the calm woman in the gray shirt, the steady nod she gave them at dawn, and the silence she left behind as she stepped into the sun. And maybe, in that memory, they would finally understand what real humility looks like. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Major Tom's Tales, where the quiet courage of warriors lives on for generations to come.